Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well tonight. I'm here with the In-Depth Show at 9 p.m. as usual. But please do your best to share. I know we have very stiff competition tonight. But still, we're going to keep on keeping on, which is what we do here. We keep on keeping on. So tonight, we're going to consider whether people's homes, they're keeping their homes or not, is really a laughing matter. Whether keeping their income or not, okay, is a laughing matter. And whether certain people who are supposed to be our leaders and who are supposed to be acting in our interests aren't simply insulting us continuously as they move along. So let's get on with it. Let's keep going. Hello, Dolores. Okay, Evelina, Kay. Thank you for coming. I think we have a few more folks here, but I cannot see them. I may be able to see them on Facebook directly. Yeah, Steve Wolfbrand is here. And Lana is here. So we certainly have a quorum. So let's go. Let's go and start the laughing matter. And here's an article from Common Dreams by Jake Johnson. And McConnell laughs when asked if the COVID-19 bill will pass by the end of next week when unemployment benefits expire for 30 million. Actually, they expire before that a bit. And there was Mitch. He laughed on Tuesday when he was asked whether he expects Congress to pass the coronavirus relief by the end of next week when enhanced unemployment benefits are set to expire for around 30 million Americans who were thrown out of work by the pandemic-induced economic crisis. Maybe a lot more than 30 million even. We'll have to see. No, McConnell said, after letting out what Jake Sherman, a Politico reporter who posed the question described as a, quote, big laugh, unquote. The $600 per week increase in unemployment benefits that were provided under the CARES Act have served as both a lifeline for tens of millions of laid-off Americans and a significant cushion for the U.S. economy. But here's Mitch. He's laughing about whether there can be an extension or not. For weeks, economists and lawmakers have warned that letting the benefit lapse, even for a short period of time, could have devastating effects on those close to the brink of financial ruin. According to the Census Bureau, more than 13 million Americans who live in rental housing were behind on rent payments as of July 7th. And Rod Wyden tweeted, he's a Democratic senator from Oregon, quote, I have a bill to renew supercharged unemployment benefits till this crisis is over so families can continue to pay rent and buy groceries. And quote again, Senate Republicans have had every opportunity to pass it and have refused to do so. Yes, the HEROES Act, if I'm not mistaken, was passed in late May, so there was plenty of time for the Republicans to do something about it. Instead, they chose to fritter away much of June, and then they chose to go on recess for much of this month. So the recess was more important than getting people the money they needed for rent and for groceries. While the enhanced unemployment benefits officially expire on July 31st, a Friday, in effect, the $600 weekly payments are set to end on either Saturday, July 25th, or Sunday, July 26th, the day states will send out the last boosted checks. 30 million workers won't be able to pay rent on August 1st, and McConnell is laughing, said Wyden spokesperson Ashley Chapital. Bobby Kogan, a mathematician for the Senate Budget Committee, tweeted that, quote, there's no excuse for allowing the enhanced benefits to expire. Quote again, we had months to get this done, and the House passed its bill back in May. Quote again, tens of millions of Americans will be harmed because of the cavalier inaction of Senate Republicans. And Shoykat Chakrabarti, who, as you may remember, used to work for AOC and is quite a brilliant guy, says, ha, so funny that millions of Americans are going to lose the only lifeline they have. The bottom from our economy will fall out, and Congress can't get its shit together to do anything about it. Get to work. And that was evidently a retweet of Jake Sherman's tweet. I just asked Senate Majority Leader if he anticipates the coronavirus bill will pass by the end of next week, which is what Mark Meadows and Stephen Mnuchin are running around the hill saying. And McConnell let out a big laugh and said, quote, no, unquote. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, laughed Tuesday. She evidently found it a laughing matter, too, when a CNN reporter asked whether Congress would be able to reach a deal on coronavirus relief legislation by the end of this week. An even more daunting timeline than the one put to McConnell, given the deep divisions roiling Senate Republicans in the White House, not to mention fundamental disagreements between the GOP and their Democratic counterparts. The end of the week? You mean the month, Pelosi responded. I'm hoping for the end of the month. In May, the Democrat-controlled House passed the HEROES Act that proposes extending the $600 per week boost in unemployment insurance through January of next year. And why not until the COVID-19 crisis ends? Why not for a year beyond that so people can get settled? What's the matter with Pelosi? What's the matter with Pelosi? Does she really want to get back again in January and have another fight? In an interview Tuesday evening with CNN's Wolf Blitzer, Pelosi said, Republicans, quote, have had plenty of time to be thinking about this, and this delay is unnecessary because by the end of July, unemployment, the benefits will expire. Okay, a moratorium on evictions will expire. Many things will expire that are addressed in our legislation. The Washington Post, though, said on Tuesday that it looks like negotiations over the relief bill are likely to spill into August, quote unquote, leaving both chambers with little time to pass legislation before summer recess. Well, maybe they'll just go on summer recess and leave everybody to fiddle for the whole month of August. Take this into September, when the campaign really gets hot. Pelosi said last week that she would absolutely, quote unquote, be willing to cancel recess to pass relief legislation. But McConnell has not said the same. No, he needs to get home. Quote, Republicans do appear to be gravitating toward a proposal on what to do about the expiring unemployment benefits, reported the Post. But Democrats want to extend them through January, but the White House and some Republicans now want to cut the extra benefits to about $200 per week. But Democrats haven't agreed to this, however, unquote. During a private meeting on Sunday, according to the Post, Trump criticized the enhanced unemployment benefits, saying it never should have been agreed to in the first place. Of course, if it hadn't been agreed to in the first place, Trump, then what would have happened is there wouldn't have been the $4.6 trillion money cannon that went to your friends and cronies. So what the hell are you talking about? Anyway, Trump administration officials and Republican lawmakers have repeatedly characterized the boosted unemployment payments as disincentives to work. So, there's another article by Owen Higgins on the 22nd, with economic calamity, quote unquote, looming. Progressive groups demand unemployment insurance benefit remain in place. And I'm going to share that too for you. Two dozen leaders of research and advocacy groups on the progressive side, in a letter to Congress Wednesday, urged federal lawmakers to ensure the federal coronavirus unemployment benefit of $600 a week is kept in place for the duration of the pandemic, arguing that to allow it to expire would be to risk, quote, economic calamity. Quote, federal pandemic unemployment compensation, PUC, which is giving tens of millions of unemployed workers $600 per week boost in unemployment income, has helped ease the pain of this crisis by providing much-needed income to families during an economic crisis and has boosted the economy overall, unquote. The letter, a copy of which was sent to Common Dreams, that declares millions of people have been able to pay rent, put food on the table, cover other necessary expenses because the CARES Act provided a $600 per week unemployment a supplement benefit. The next COVID relief bill needs to extend hashtag UI to avoid a disaster. And continued, the UI claims have reached 30 million at this point. The letter, signed by groups including Move On and the Groundwork Collaborative, adds that unemployment insurance is keeping the economy afloat by helping workers pay their bills. Quote, slashing workers' income now by any amount before it is safe to go back to work, and where there are still more than 3 times as many unemployed workers as job openings, will further hurt demand, unquote. It says the letter, and quote again, any cut will mean millions of families will have less to spend at grocery stores, restaurants, and other businesses, which will catalyze a second wave of layoffs and compound economic hardship across the country. And the groundwork by Collaborative tweeted, "It's a simple principle. Economic recovery begins with us. Hashtag we are the economy." And there's a graphic in this tweet. It says $600 is directly supporting 5.1 million jobs across the country. But the Economic Policy Institute goes further and says the $600 weekly unemployment boost is critical to helping families keep food on the table, a roof over their heads, and the lights turned on. Congress must hashtag extend unemployment insurance and hashtag save the 600. And then the graphic says $600 is critical income for 26,049,897 people. And on Tuesday, economist Doug Henwood argued at Jacobin that the program's end would be massively destructive. Henwood said, if those benefits are allowed to expire or are renewed at a lower rate, look out below. Even with them, food banks have been doing a record business, with COVID-19 caseloads rising in much of the country with little relief in sight. Employers are preparing for a fresh round of firings. Dreams of a rapid recovery in the second half of this year have evaporated in all but the most delusional of minds. If unemployment benefits are cut, in addition to spreading mass sickness and death, there will be a fresh round of immiseration. That's right. But Mitch McConnell laughed Tuesday when asked if legislation would be finished for the $600 payments end this week. Some advocates are calling for a temporary reauthorization of the full slate of unemployment benefits that tied the American people over while the Senate and House thrash out the situation. There is a very obvious and simple way to deal with this situation, said Jordan Weissman of Slate on Wednesday. Quote, Congress should just extend the $600 per week unemployment benefits that are now in place for an additional 2 or 3 weeks. Unquote. So, that's laughing about failing. Stacy says, Henwood is a total ass. That said, we should be having a discussion about how unemployment benefits are wholly inadequate under normal circumstances. Yes, we should, Stacy. Yes, we should. Let us now move on to encroaching on democracy. Sorry. I pulled up the wrong encroachment. So there was an article by Bob Cheska in Salon that got picked up by reader-supported news where I saw it. And the title of it is, we all know Donald Trump is preparing to rig or steal the election, but exactly how? Exactly how? And I'm going to share that one too, so we can find out exactly how, as if we didn't already know. Do we already know? We may already know. We at least can imagine pretty accurately. And Cheska says by now it's relatively easy to forecast Donald Trump's tyrannical moves. There are no advanced Frank Underwood-style chess gambits in play here. Was Frank Underwood a chess player? Or was he a bridge player? I forget. It's barely Candyland, despite the fascistic goals involved. Trump is, on top of it all, A simple-minded, easily predictable Golgothan, that's a monster, who telegraphs every move of self-preservation. Sometimes it can be reassuring. Let me zoom this a bit. There it is. Sometimes it can be reassuring to have a sense of where he's going with his repetitious blurts. I like that, repetitious blurts. At other times, it leaves us with this perpetual sense of instability, knowing what might be lurking around the corner. The November election fits horrifyingly into the latter category. I believe I know how Trump will try to interfere with the process, as well as the outcome, and it's more than a little unnerving, especially given the cataclysmic stakes this time. Warning, this is a bit of a horror show, so hang on tight. Oh, and everything that follows presumes a close race with the advantage leading in Joe Biden's direction. Well, if we're lucky, we won't have a close race. We'll have a 15 or 20 point advantage for Trump's opponent. I'm not going to bias things by naming Trump's opponent. I mean, hopefully it might be Howie Hawkins. But anyway, we're all brutally aware that every move Trump makes is aimed squarely at re-election. If he's not re-elected, he could face criminal prosecution and dozens of lawsuits after he returns to being a private citizen. He knows better than anyone that the presidency is the only thing saving him either from the slammer or from an underground escape to a non-extradition country. As part of his herky-jerky maneuvers to evade legal jeopardy, we also know he's willing to sentence hundreds of thousands of Americans to death and millions more on top of that to suffer from permanent pre-existing conditions. Due to his near genocidal indifference to the pandemic, indifference aimed at manipulating the stock market and thereby boosting in his re-election chances. It's a matter of historical record that he was impeached by Congress and put on trial for trying to cheat in the election while refusing to discourage Russia from cyber attacking the process again. So Cheska is a believer in the myths that any cyber attacking of the process by the Russians had any material effect on the election. He accepts to see the intelligence community narrative uncritically and evidently without any qualification, even though there's been no evidence produced that there was a cyber attack on the process. So you get the point. He's capable of doing anything in order to win, even risking his legal future, but none of the above tactics directly addresses how he might handle the actual process of suppressing and overturning votes. Like a petulant boy who tosses a board game across the room when he's losing, Trump is going to hurl the election process into absolute chaos. Here's how. He'll continue to suppress voting by discouraging absentee voting while benefiting from new and existing roadblocks to in-person voting. Then, on and after Election Day, he'll sue to try and stop absentee ballots from being counted. You might have seen the unintentionally hilarious video of Trump on Fox News Sunday last Wednesday. During his sweaty, lie-filled exchange with Chris Wallace, the president once again repeated, "I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election." He also said that he might not accept the outcome of the election. Quote, I have to see, unquote, Trump said when pressed on the question. Absentee voting, also known as, quote, the mail-in, unquote, voting, will be his primary target in his plan to derail the election. Point of order, all mail-in ballots are absentee, including the president's ballots. I will therefore use the term, quote, absentee, unquote, from this point forward. Election day won't be a day at all this year. In fact, some estimates suggest we won't know the winner of the election, of the presidential election, let alone contested Senate and House races for a week or more after November 3rd, mainly due to the record number of absentee ballots used during pandemic conditions. It'll take days to electronically tabulate all those votes, and maybe weeks for hand-counted ballots in some precincts. I'm not even factoring in the possibility of recanvassing or actual recounts. So far, 33 states and the District of Columbia allow some form of voting by mail without an excuse for one's absence. Oregon has conducted all elections by mail since 1998 with no significant problems. Colorado and Washington State have adopted by universal vote by mail more recently. By the way, the absentee voting states, including Florida, where Trump will be voting by mail this year, again with no excuse needed, the other 17 states require an excuse, but at least some of those will likely change the rules before November, eliminating the need for an excuse. The main focus of Trump's shrieking about absentee voting, of course, is to establish a hearts and minds framework to support legal challenges against those ballots. Okay, to that end, he's routinely exploiting the bully pulpit to manufacture doubt about the reliability of absentee voting. From there, he's capable of launching a series of lawsuits against boards of elections, perhaps in every state where absentee ballots are used, or just in states with margins too close to call. As long as he continues to hammer his loyalists about the evils of absentee voting between now and Election Day, they'll be increasingly likely to back him up during the actual process, organizing demonstrations and maybe a few the Brooks Brothers riots, not unlike Election 2000. Any and all swing states will be ripe for legal challenges, not because of actual election or voter fraud, but simply because Trump believes there's fraud taking place, or to be more accurate, because he claims to believe that. The other point is to discourage the use of absentee ballots with the broader goal of convincing pro-Trump state officials to roll back existing absentee rules. After all, it's much more difficult to monkey around with absentee votes that by definition include a paper trail. On the other hand, in-person votes cast on electronic voting machines are more susceptible to manipulation and hacking, whether by Russian agents or someone else. Well, at least Cheska grants it might be by someone else. And we all know about Trump's business partners in Moscow and their track record with American elections. We all do. Where's the evidence, Putz? In his desperation, Trump will be eager to meddle with every voting format, covering all his bases. Challenge after challenge could rocket propel the entire election back into the hands of the Supreme Court, home of the infamous Bush v. Gore decision. And there's no guarantee that Chief Justice John Roberts will swing the way we hope he will. Yeah, maybe he'll take after Sandra Day O'Connor. Irrespective of where Trump's legal challenges land, he will absolutely use the courts as a delaying action, making for a hell of a long process at a time when the patience of the American people is practically non-existent. Well, the article goes on. He talks about how thick the legal challenges are going to be, and it's possible that his indefinite deployment of federal stormtroopers in selected cities, the secret police we just saw, will discourage some voters from turning out.
Trump screeching has also suggested he might order ICE and CBP goons, Customs and Border Patrol goons, to monitor polling places, which could discourage our Latino citizens or other recent immigrants from voting. One more thing, as the days following the election descend into chaos, it wouldn't shock me if Trump simply declared victory before all the votes are counted. That won't mean much in the grand scheme, but it will further incite his people and worsen the chaos. I don't know how all this will end, but I feel relatively secure in forecasting the mayhem. Honestly, as with everything Trump, I hope I'm wrong and this election wraps up without a glitch. But given King Joffrey the Flaccid's actions lately, especially with his contra-constitutional deployment of unidentified soldiers to disappear protesters from the streets, it would be foolish to count on a smooth ride. The absolute best strategy for the Democratic Party, and indeed all normals, is to prepare for a bloody mess before we have a winner. The party ought to be fully lawyered up in anticipation of Trump's psycho bombs detonating at polling places and in state capitals across the country. Don't be blindsided. I think we can all agree Donald Trump will not go quietly or accept defeat with any measure of dignity, knowing the stunts he's likely to pull and preparing accordingly is half the battle. I thought this was pretty good as an indication of some of the more common things Trump is likely to try and what he's likely to do to stay in office. So moving on, we explore a little more what is now happening on the stormtrooper front. And another article in Common Dreams, stirring fears of pre-crime policing. The DHS head, Chad Wolf, confirms federal agents in Portland are making, quote, proactive, unquote, arrests. You can't make proactive arrests. Owen Higgins says, welcome to 2020 Minority Report Edition. If you remember that particular film with Tom Cruise. Critics unloaded on Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf after the urgency head revealed in an interview on Fox News Tuesday evening that federal law enforcement officers in Portland, Oregon are, quote, proactively, unquote, arresting demonstrators in the city. Unfortunately, proactively arresting people or detaining people is unconstitutional and highly illegal. You can't proactively arrest people because you think they're going to commit a crime or because you think they may commit a crime. And Amir Khalifa, in response to the remarks, tweeted, he's a journalist, quote, Chad Wolf needs to be, quote, proactively, unquote, relieved of duty, unquote. Yes. Yes, because you can fire people proactively, even though, according to the Constitution, you cannot arrest them proactively. Wolf told Fox News anchor Martha McCallum that DHS agents were detaining protesters because of insufficient assistance from local law enforcement and city officials. Again, they have no constitutional right to do that. It's a violation of constitutional rights.
whatever the assistance or lack of it they get from the local authorities. Quote, because we don't have that local support, that local law enforcement support, we're having to go out and proactively arrest individuals. So, in other words, you think it would have been legal if the local police had proactively arrested people? I don't think so. He argued that his stormtroopers aren't bound by the physical jurisdiction of federal property. They're not. Constitution schmonstitution, replied journalist Dan Gilmore. Secretary added that federal officers did not need local permission to conduct operations in the city, calling the assertion ridiculous, quote unquote. Oh, yeah? On what authority was he in Portland? Where's his authority? What law does it come from? Inquiring minds want to know. Quote, you need to hold individuals accountable, said Wolf. Quote, when we don't do that, I think we get what we see in Portland today, unquote. Yeah, we do need to hold individuals accountable. Specifically, we need to hold Wolf accountable for violating the constitutional rights of people on the streets of Portland. Civil liberties advocates noted the similarity between Wolf's proactive language and the plot of the 2002 film Minority Report, in which Tom Cruise plays a futuristic cop tasked with, quote, pre-crime, unquote, policing. In other words, tweeted journalist Ashton Pittman, they're arresting people who haven't actually done anything wrong, unquote. And quote again, welcome to 2020, Minority Report edition, unquote. President Donald Trump has suggested in recent days that he'll deploy DHS officers to other cities around the country, and officials said to Politico the efforts could continue for months. According to Politico, senior DHS officials said they expect the unrest to escalate at least through the November election, noted that the protection of federal buildings falls squarely within their remit. DHS can temporarily authorize officers and agents from its other components, including ICE and CBP, to protect federal buildings. Since DHS officers began operating in Portland, detaining protesters and shooting tear gas and other projectiles at crowds, demonstrations in the city have exploded in size. That's because Trump always knows what's going to happen. And he thought his bringing in his police would serve to quell the demonstrations. No, they just exploded in size. Why? Because Trump, like a broken clock, is only correct 2 times per day. All the rest of the time, he's way off base. As Common Dreams reported, protesters have been joined this week by a wall of moms who stand between demonstrators and federal officials. And of course, this is being well covered by the Convo Couch, by Fiorella and Pasta and Johnny Tsu. So, one more on that gross situation. Highly gross situation. This one from The Guardian. Federal agents retreat to Portland base as protesters control the streets. I thought this one was hilarious. There's a picture of Donald Trump's shadowy police force This one was by Chris McGrail, who was in Portland. And he says, night upon night, the chant goes up in front of Portland's federal courthouse. Quote, whose streets? Unquote. You know the answer to that, of course, folks. The answer depends on the hour of the day. After Donald Trump sent federal agents to take control of a city he said had been abandoned by its mayor to anarchists and mob rule, the protesters still turning out in support of Black Lives Matter can make a legitimate claim that these are, as the chant goes, quote, our streets, unquote. Department of Homeland Security task force agents were again out firing waves of tear gas and throwing stun grenades against the hardcore of a few hundred demonstrators in the early hours of Wednesday morning. The confrontation centered on the courthouse at the heart of several blocks of downtown Portland that have effectively fallen under the control of the protesters after the city police withdrew. But after pushing back demonstrators, many of them were kitted out in helmets and gas masks. The federal agents retreated into their courthouse citadel to mocking jeers and women who were part of the Wall of Moms protest, linking arms and chanting, quote, our streets, unquote. And there's a picture of the Wall of Moms. This ritual was played out 3 times on Wednesday morning, but the end result was the same as every other night. The DHS officers dispatched by the president to put down the demonstrations have instead become prisoners of the building they are ostensibly there to defend. The feds don't have control of the streets, said a woman holding a sign. Quote, 100% not a terrorist, unquote, who gave her name only as Shannon. I think they're more scared than us. They're hiding in there. They don't know what they're doing, unquote. On Monday, the president declared the deployment of the DHS task force a success. There he is, wrong again. Quote, in Portland, they've done a fantastic job. They've been there 3 days, and they really have done a fantastic job in a very short period of time, unquote, he said. The view from Portland streets tells a different story. The arrival of the federal officers drawn from several agencies, including the U.S. Marshal Service and the Border Patrol, fleetingly sent a wave of alarm but through the demonstrators after men in camouflage began snatching people off the streets in unmarked vans. Those detained said they were dragged into the courthouse without being told why they were arrested or by whom, and then suddenly let go without any official record of being held. It smacked of police state tactics. So did some of the violence meted out by federal agents who looked more like an occupying army in a war zone. But if the intent was to intimidate the protesters into abandoning the few square blocks of downtown Portland under their control, it backfired spectacularly. Look at that scene. Residents of a city with a long history of radical street protest were outraged at the tactics which suddenly revitalized the protest movement that was waning after more than 50 nights of demonstrations. Well, Bo, the fifth column has been telling us every day this week Trump's been doing the wrong thing. He's just doing the wrong thing. That's not what you do when you want to stop protests. What you do is negotiate. You give people some things, and you back off, and you solve things in a very peaceful way, and that moves the protest. It is now the federal agents who appear under siege, reduced to defending the courthouse from attempts to break in or set it on fire. In a visible surrender of ground, the DHS task force has even abandoned bothering to re-erect a fence around the federal building torn down on Saturday night. Meanwhile, the protesters ranged free over several city blocks where businesses were first shut down by coronavirus and then boarded up after some shops were smashed in the initial protests that swept the country following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May, after a police officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. The ubiquitous graffiti on stores, the county jail, and the courthouse, including portraits of Floyd, and violent denunciations of the police, mark out the protesters' territory. If Trump's intent was to calm things down, he's failed. But if, as some suspect, the president wanted to ratchet up confrontation for political gain, then it's not clear that it has been a success either. It's a power play by Trump, quote. He thinks he's going to get his base all riled up by pitting the forces of law and order against the anarchists, unquote, said Josh O'Brien, who traveled from Seattle to join the protests. Quote, but he's fucked it up like he fucks everything up. Look who's here with us. Grandmothers, doctors. Because like most Americans, they don't think people should be abducted from the streets by the president's secret police. The video of unidentifiable agents bundling Americans into unmarked vans may indeed not play well with some of Trump's right-wing supporters, for whom incidents such as the FBI's killing of a woman and her teenage son during a 1992 siege at Ruby Ridge have come to represent what they see as an authoritarian federal government. While the federal agents play out their nightly ritual, the city's police are visibly absent. Although the Portland Police Bureau headquarters is in the building next to the federal courthouse, its officers appear to have abandoned any attempt to police the demonstrations after the mayor, who serves as a police commissioner, sided with the protesters against the president. On top of that, a court order limited the city's police's use of tear gas and other means of restraint. That has, in the eyes of some of the demonstrators, created a, quote, a liberated territory, unquote, similar to the autonomous zone, quote unquote, in Seattle, until it was cleared earlier this month. The federal court and neighboring county jail are opposite two parks that serve as a demonstrator's base, and where a food stand has come to symbolize the endurance of the protests. Riot Ribs dispenses sustenance, including a vegetarian option, free to demonstrators. The members of the collective preparing the food have been targeted by federal agents charging out of the courthouse, but have returned to cooking after each encounter. Man does not live by bread alone, but he does need some bread to live, or at least some riot ribs. And finally, I wanted to introduce you to another article from Common Dreams. This may not really be finally, I don't really know yet. I will do at least this one more, which is called Abuse of Power. Trump and Barr to deploy more federal agents to U.S. cities. Ah, yes. In case you were wondering, this is precisely what fascism looks like. There's news, by the way, that some of the folks in Camus have arrived in Chicago already. President Donald Trump and Attorney General William Barr announced Wednesday afternoon that the federal government is deploying U.S. Department of Homeland Security agents in Chicago and Albuquerque, New Mexico, claiming the move is a response to criminal unrest. Quote, the FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshal Service, and Homeland Security will together be sending hundreds of skilled law enforcement officers to Chicago to help drive down violent crime, unquote, the president said during prepared remarks at the White House. Of course, The only violent crime there is in Chicago right now is probably by the Chicago police, but that's another matter. That's usually the violent crime there is in Chicago. Anyway, Aaron Rupert tweeted, Trump, the FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshal Service, and Homeland Security will together be sending hundreds of skilled law enforcement officers to Chicago to help drive down violent crime, unquote. I thought I read somewhere it was only going to be 150 troops. I don't think 150 troops is enough to control Chicago. Trump and Barr both tied rises in violent crimes in U.S. cities to recent protests for Black lives and against police brutality that erupted after the police killing of George Floyd in May. Neither man provided any evidence to back up those claims. Yes, the evidence-free administration. No evidence, just lies. And Mark Berman tweeted, A.G. Barr, like Trump before him, links the recent rise in violent crime in some cities to recent protests against police, calls for defunding, calling the increasing violence a direct result of it. He offers no evidence, nor does he say why some crimes are up and others are down. The deployment announcement was largely panned by critics who called the effort another sign of Trump's authoritarian approach to the presidency. In case you were wondering, this is precisely what fascism looks like, tweeted Los Angeles Times columnist David Lazarus. And Evan Hill, who's at Evan C. Hill, or at Evan Chill, says new. Trump announces the Justice Department will surge hundreds of officers from FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and DHS to Chicago to deal with violent crime as part of Justice Department's new Operation The Legend, named after a 4-year-old boy shot in Kansas City. Shot by whom? Shot by the police? Anyway, during Wednesday's press conference on the expansion of the Operation The Legend program, which began in Kansas City, Barr and Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf sought to distinguish the program from the ongoing clashes between DHS agents and protesters in Portland, Oregon. But those assurances will have to do a lot to overcome the skepticism of local officials, especially as the number of agents expected to be deployed under the program is still unclear. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot warned on Tuesday that a Portland-style federal deployment would only make unrest in the city worse. And she says, quote, what I understand at this point, and I caveated that, is that the Trump administration is not going to foolishly deploy unnamed agents to the streets of Chicago, unquote, said Lightfoot. According to the Associated Press, the officers were dispatched to Portland, Oregon, and other localities to protect federal property and monuments, as Trump has lambasted efforts by protesters to knock down Confederate statues. So, by the way, Tammy Duckworth was asked some questions about that at MS on NBC, and she replied, it's not an appropriate use of federal police to send them into local areas to stop the destruction of statues of Confederate traitors to the United States, is what she said. And she condemned it as an inappropriate use of the military and an unconstitutional use of the military, not actually an unconstitutional use of federal police, because in this case, they were not actually the military. They're only the quasi-military, Trump's quasi-military. Trump has linked the growing violence in the streets with protests over racial injustice, though criminal justice experts say the spike defies easy explanation, pointing to the unprecedented moment the country is living through, with a pandemic that has killed more than 140,000 Americans, historic unemployment, stay-at-home orders, a mass reckoning over race and police, the brutality, intense stress, and even the weather. But Jamie Raskin, okay, who's a representative from the state of Maryland, on Wednesday led 116 of his colleagues, that's congresspeople, in a letter demanding Barn Wolf answer their questions on the ongoing Portland deployment and any planned expansion of federal law enforcement programs in U.S. Cities. And Jamie said, this is not legitimate law enforcement under our Constitution, but a shocking slide. A shocking slide. Okay. A slocking side. I can't resist. Shocking slide into authoritarianism and police state tactics. And of course, it's not a laughing matter. The letter reads, adding that these new tactics are an outrageous assault on the liberties of the people and the police powers and political sovereignty of the states, unquote. Trump and Barr's announcement follows over a week of speculation that federal agents would enter U.S. cities despite the local resistance. Former DHS spokesperson David Lapan said to Politico Tuesday that he fears the ramifications of the president's new move to use federal agents for domestic law enforcement. He says it's overly militaristic, it's being seen in partisan political terms, and it's usurping the authorities of the local law enforcement and elected officials. Advocacy group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CREW, tweeted, CREW that is, tweeted that the DIJ's use of federal agents for Trump's Trump's political goals was a clear reason to impeach the Attorney General. How about a clear reason to impeach Trump as well? Why stop at the Attorney General? Obviously, Trump had orders, but the Attorney General had orders from Trump. So impeach them both. Quote, turning federal forces against racial justice protesters is what abuse of power looks like, Cruz said. And quote again, Congress should waste no time in impeaching AG Barr before he goes further in carrying out President Trump's racist agenda. I completely agree, but again, Congress should waste no time in impeaching Donald Trump and throwing the impeachment in Mitch McConnell's face. I think Nancy Pelosi should throw impeachments at Mitch McConnell's face every 3 days until the election. There's that much to impeach him on. Let's see if there are any late developments worth discussing on the deployment of fascist troops across the United States, or maybe I should say the fascist deployment of secret police across the United States. Okay, so I guess that's it. I'm now going to turn to your comments. I hope there have been a lot of them. You should be going nuts because of all the fascism that's in the air right now. It's thicker than the COVID virus, folks. It's thicker than the COVID virus. And in the end, even more deadly. And if you think I'm wrong about this, note the potential here for civil war. Not just for civil war, but if Trump persists in this with respect to the West Coast, there's a secessionist movement out on the West Coast where more than once people have suggested that maybe California and a few other states would be better off by themselves rather than being part of the United States. Trump could just drive him to it. Could just drive him to it. Thanks everybody for sharing. Lana says I shared to several groups. Going to duck out. We'll listen later. Thank you for sharing, Lana. Steve says going to be a lot of homeless people. Sad. Steve says seems like they're always on recess. They're always on recess. They're trying to gauge how angry people are at them, whether they will survive or not. But when they went on recess during July, everybody was still getting unemployment. And a lot of other money was flowing. Now the flow of money is stopping. What they really need to do, I mean, the Republicans are ridiculous about this. They somehow think, they delusionally think that in the middle of this new spiking of the COVID virus all across the country in various states, that if they refuse to vote financial help for people, allowing them to stay home, that the economy will come roaring back and people will forgive them for coercing people into risking their lives. People are not going to do that. That's not what's going to happen. I think the Republicans will be lucky not to have people show up at their homes and do what's necessary when they get there. Russ Garman says, evening. Kay says Pelosi is too rich and entitled. Hope she is soon gone. Russell says Ms. Pago doesn't give two shits about human well-being. She's got her designer gourmet ice cream ready to wait it all out. She's a POS. Yeah. She sure is. Steve says now they're hanging some trumped-up charges on Shahed. What kind of trumped-up charges are they hanging on Shahed? Kay says, who's doing that, Steve? Shahed's a lawyer. Carmen says, let's see if this device works. Hello, honey bunches. Hello, Carmen. I see your name is back up there. No more Avro. Stacy says, I'm late. Was listening to county council meeting with the tail end of it. Was rather entertaining because it involved an audit of Sheriff Chuck Jenkins' 287G program. Wow. Steve Wolfbrand said some women are accusing him of sexual harassment. I haven't looked into it yet. He doesn't seem like that type to me. They tried that with Assange as well. Yeah, I don't believe that of Shahed for 1 minute. He comes over as a completely straight arrow. Carmen says, I don't see them taking the 600 a week. But Pelosi must think she's in trouble. She must think she's in trouble. Otherwise, why would she get people to trump up charges against Shahed? Kay says, I don't believe that about him either. Carmen says, how my dad sexually harassed my mom. That's how I got here. He says it's a joke. Nope, connection gone again. Stacy says, Henwood is a total ass. That said, we should be having a discussion about how unemployment benefits are wholly inadequate under normal circumstances. So let's have that discussion. So the turtle thinks this is funny. Yeah, the turtle thinks this is funny. He does. He thinks his failure to get anything passed in June or July is funny. His failure to even consider passing anything. He thinks that's funny. The rest of us don't think it's funny. We think it's so unfunny, we think his butt needs to get kicked out. Post haste. Steve says Biden is still sleeping in the basement. Kay says, I can't see him helping people much. Anyway, Steve. Steve says, me neither, Kay. I can't see him helping people either, but he has put out 2 programs now that are more encouraging than anything else that he has said. One, a program for providing considerable funding to caregivers, $778 billion estimated at over a 10-year period. Pretty sizable program, still not enough, but certainly a good start. And then, of course, his the climate agenda is getting touted by some people who are pretty much involved in the climate movement, like Julian Brave, but Noise Cats of but Data Progress, but Data for Progress. He had an article in The Guardian on the program and why he thinks it's pretty good. Seems like it was pretty fair and outlined to me, but it's a $2 trillion program. And of course, it would have looked a hell of a lot better, okay, if it had a job guarantee associated with it and had far more of the Bernie agenda in it, which it did not have. Avril says, shared and invited with pleasure. Evelina says, that reminds me of what Nancy Pelosi said. She said they're going to fumigate Trump out of the White House if he doesn't want to leave after he loses. Evelina says, I think we need to raid now. Avril says, yes, now. Raid the White House. Laugh out loud. Avril says, man, that Chad Wolf fascist needs to go. I don't think he's even been approved by Congress for the position that he holds. He should be immediately impeached. So I read. And Avril says, with the Blue Can Max formula, Evelina says, storm the White House. It sprays 2 ways to kill all vermin hiding in the cracks and crevices. And Russell says, this sounds annoyingly anxiety-raising with all this shit. That's what Trump's about. He wants to raise anxiety. He figures he can capitalize on the irrationality. Avril says, bunker bitch will hide. He's a fascist bully, but a cowardly tyrant. He is. He is a cowardly tyrant. If anything comes near him, he's going to run for the hills. If you should happen to get close enough to him to unmask him and then cough in his face, he's going to run like hell. Evelina says, haha, that's brilliant. Steve says, you're not kidding. Avril says, coming to chicken, I mean Chicago. Kay says, feels very Hitler-esque if you get my drift. Evelina says, to say the least. Steve Wolfbrand says, Hitler proactively arrested Jews. He did. Avril said there was a former general straight up cussing Trump over the tyranny in Portland. Yeah, the former general was General Russell Honore. He was the general who cleaned up New Orleans after Katrina. He was the one who came in and organized things again. And he straight up cussed out Trump. He condemned him. He condemned him for disgracing the uniforms. He said the uniforms the police had, they were military uniforms. They were uniforms that our military was wearing with honor. Okay, I don't know about that, but he was certainly very clear about the secret police not wearing those uniforms with honor and that being inappropriate to clothe the secret police in the camo of the military. And he went on and on about it. And he was the same old Russ Honore. No nonsense, no BS. Just lay it all out on the line. Stacey says they don't care about rights or laws or anything really. So far, they're getting away with all of it. Well, the courts, the wheels of justice in the courts, unfortunately, grind a little too deliberately for wannabe dictators. They may grind fine, but unfortunately, I don't know whether would-be dictators are going to give them time to grind. I think the courts may have to get off their asses and produce some injunctions. And Congress may have to get off its ass and impeach this president and this attorney general. Kay says, and the German gypsies were before them. That's how my one grandma got here. Yeah. Steve says, stormtroopers are coming to a town near you. Stacy says, Kylo Ren in the First Order. Not Kylo Ren. It's Mussolini. Avro says, because they're counting on SCOTUS to let them get away with it. I don't think they're counting on SCOTUS. I think what they're doing is that they're trying to push the system as far as they can. And they're daring SCOTUS or the courts to fail to let them get away with it. That's what Trump does. That's what Trump does. He pushes and pushes and pushes until someone stops him. He doesn't necessarily count on they're not stopping him. He just pushes on the chance that they won't stop him. Because too many times in his life, people did not stop him. But occasionally, they have. And when they have, he's lost a lot of money. Then, he's never gone to jail for it, unfortunately, but he's lost a lot of money. Stacey says, the Senate is doing a great job on their own. Pelosi is useless. Worse than useless. Avro says, now, you know what's ironic? All those so-called militias that are always whining about federal tyranny are dead silent now that it's a real deal. Evelina, the irony of it. Evelina, the irony of your words. Now that it's the real deal, correction. Stacey says, just like the states are supposed to handle the pandemic on their own, but bad demonstrators writing on walls and demanding human treatment, they have to be handled by the federal government. Steve Day says, war of moms, and Avril says, I love the dads joining in with leaf blowers. It's that inspirational. Evelina says, the irony of your words, too. They were attacking drivers in Colorado at a road stop? Wow. Kay says, I was thinking that too, Avril. Evelina says, Colorado, horrible. Steve Day says, photos on Evelina. Who are the militias attacking drivers in Colorado? Oh, my fucking God. OMFG. Avril says, L. Stephen Day, I don't have photos. No, only briefly read about it earlier. Steve Day says, leaf blow back the gas. Evelina says, don't know, they were white bearded, look like hillbillies to me, but then I'm no expert, I'm an urban gal. Avril says, so they're finally getting rid of the um, um, Confederate memorabilia on Capitol Hill. Took long enough, but it's trivial. Yes, it is trivial. Kay says, Avril would be better if they actually help people. Steve Day says, riot ribs, laugh out loud. Yeah, riot ribs, yeah. Who knows? Sometimes I think it's counterproductive. We need grandparents to join the protesters with their oxygen tanks. Would be good weapons and beekeepers with their long-range flamethrowers. Avril says, I'm just tripping. Evelina says, but then maybe not. Unleashing the bees would be enough. God, are there any bees still left to unleash? Steve Day says, skilled law enforcement. So, Dr. Joe, do you think there's enough pushback against DT's testing the waters again this time? No, not yet. But I think it's going to build. And eventually, there may be enough pushback so that he'll back off. Because what he does is when it gets a little heavy for him, he starts running backward. That may happen soon. Evelina says 150 to Chicago is for show. Well, it may not be 150. It might be a lot more. What does Joe B say today? I didn't notice that Joe B. I thought he might have said something yesterday. Hang on a second. I thought I saw. Something yesterday that was in the Guardian that he may have said. There was the riot ribs thing. So let's see what's come up in there. Let's see what's come up in the Guardian. Nope, I don't see anything from Biden. Thought I saw something yesterday. Not yet. Not yet. I don't think there's been anything yet. It would have been somewhere there. Hasn't said a word about it. Be prepared. It's for provocation, says Avro. Kay says bees have enough of their own problems, especially activists in suits. Don't the governors and mayors see that Trump is instigating? Yeah, they see that he's instigating. And in Portland, he's facing all kinds of lawsuits. There are at least 3 lawsuits that are going on against the federal government there. And the mayor of Chicago is going to slap him with a lawsuit as soon as those federal troops get there. Evelina says, I love bees, wouldn't send them to war. And Avril says, how about roaches then? Plenty of them in the cities. Stacy says, Jamie Raskin is my congressperson. Yep, he is. He is, because you live in Maryland, north of the city. But Desiree Santiago, welcome, Desiree, says Avram Mano, because the South and supremacy has taken over the reins of government. They never cared about the Constitution, or else they wouldn't be calling us terrorists for exercising the First Amendment. We're starting to stand up against all forms of inequality, whichever makes the rich less rich, so the wealthy stirred up the stuff, so we wouldn't be able to come after them, use supremacy to make 35% of the country rabid against those who want justice. They call us defenders of democracy. Indeed. Kay says this is actually scary. What if he does start another civil war? Oh my God. But Desiree Santiago, tragic truth. Evelina Ponte says, nah, Pelosi would have them sprayed. Poor roaches. Won't work. She'll throw designer ice cream at them. What a great name. Honore. Russell Honore. It is a great name. Kay says, I love General Honore. I'm sorry, I scrolled down too fast. Okay, here it is. She's not on our side, says Evelina about Nancy Pelosi. Kay says, I know that all too well. Stacey says, now Pelosi whiffed. Okay, I said initially Trump, Barr, Pompeo, and Pence should all be impeached at once, but nobody listens to me. I would have thrown DeVos in there too, and me too. I would have thrown more than that. I would have impeached the whole frickin' cabinet. Steve Wolfbrand said, never thought I would see this happening in my lifetime. Evelina says, I'm listening. But me neither, Steve. Avril says, I've had fasciitis, so I absolutely hate fascism. Stacy says, but you can friend me, Evelina, as can anyone in here. I do post some interesting stuff from time to time. Russ says, I wish that I were in Washington State right now, just in case there is a secessionist movement about to happen. If it happens, there would be a West Coast nation, I think, with at least California, Oregon, and Washington in it. And it wouldn't surprise me if that West Coast nation were to join Canada, if Canada would have them. I think that's about 55 million people. So if I'm not mistaken, so that would be a pretty viable nation. It would be larger than Spain. Not too far in population from the size, of France. And if Canada were to join up as well, it would be a nation very close to the population of Germany. That would be a major nation. And if some of the closest states, decided to join up, like, say, Nevada, still more, I think maybe some other nations would be willing to do that as well, but they'd have to change their politics a bit. Steve says, same here. Stacy says, I sent you a request, Steve. Avril says, they figure a second economic impact check will keep pacifying the public again. It won't be enough. I mean, it's going to be gone in a month. Remember, the unemployment checks were running at $600 a week. That's about $2,600 a month. That's not replaced by a $1,200 check. Also, the first time around, people got the $1,200 check, $2,400 a family, plus the $600 a week, plus the $2,600 a month. That kept the economy going. Stupid Republicans think that if they cut that $600 a month by 2/3 and they give people a $1,200 check, that's going to keep things going. That's not going to keep things going. No way that's going to happen. Bonnie says, since the public is carrying more illegal guns, do you think this can start a real war with Trump sending soldiers to states and maybe really killing people, not just hitting people? I don't know how far Trump will go, but I suspect that Trump is going to back off, that he's not going to start to kill people. He's going to start to back off. I mean, it's too dangerous, you know? He has hostile states all around him. He has Virginia, a large portion of which is hostile. Okay, Maryland, a large portion of which, okay, is hostile. And he has D.C., which is overwhelmingly hostile to him. How many troops is he going to need to contain the citizens of D.C., Maryland, okay, and but also Virginia, if they decide his continued occupancy of the White House is unacceptable? How many troops is he going to need to handle the populations of all three areas? Going to take more than 150. Going to take more than 400. It's going to take more than 50,000. It's going to take more than 100,000. Avril said, I'll check. I don't look very often or send another one. Avril says, keep the public pacified. Sorry. And Russell says, I'm sure he's wanting some serious violence to respond to. Actually, I don't think he's wanting some serious violence to respond to. I think what he likes better is having some not so serious violence he can claim, okay, is serious, and it looks like, okay, it might be serious, so it justifies his sending the troops in, so it scares the suburbs. He's trying to scare the suburbs, okay, into voting for him. Evelina says, I think it would pacify many people. Avril says it will. And universal child care, but he's not going to have any universal child care. Kay says, I don't believe Biden, I don't believe Biden, but no matter what he says, and I agree with you there, I don't believe him either, no matter what he says. Avril says the federal government are never going to give us enough because they want corporations to dominate. The people who run the federal government want the corporations to dominate. That's why we got to get them out. Evelina says, I don't either. Say says, the child care thing is so convoluted. Why isn't there a program that just pays the parents to watch the kids in any of the programs? Too simple for them. They always need a wonky solution. Because what would they do if they didn't have any money for the wonks who they usually use to help them get elected? Kay says, I love General Honore. Avril says, yes, that's the right general. Steve Day says, connection weird for a week. My phone can show decent 4G bars and the internet takes forever, and FB says it will do whatever when I am online. What a great name, Monterey. Yes, Eveline, it fits him. It does. It fits his manner and his actions. Avril says, the military understands how the Portland fascist spiel erodes important uh, public morale. Steve Wolfbrand says, the Convo Couch is live streaming right now a recap of their 5-day road trip. It's very good. They're still in Portland. I'll watch it after this. Thank you, Steve. Kay says, Fitz, I'll probably watch it after this too. Evelina says, what a drag. Stacy says, fun fact, Kylo Ren is the child of Han Solo and Princess Leia in the latest iteration of Star Wars. He's a bad guy. Yeah, I know. I haven't seen all those films, but I know that he's the child of Han Solo and Princess Leia in the latest iteration of Star Wars, and I know he's the bad guy who has to be dispatched by, what's her name? And Avril says, Evelina Pont, yeah, my device sucks. Steve says, Portland demonstrators are getting better. Helmets, leaf blowers, shields, umbrellas, gas masks. Avril says, whatever works. Real grassroots. Love it. By the way, Tim Black did a beautiful eulogy last night for the young progressive that died, for Michael Brooks. He did mention a 4-year-old conversation that he regretted. Yes, that's what I was talking about yesterday. I saw that. Yeah, Ray is her name. Ray. Yeah. I kept thinking Ren, but then I thought it couldn't be Ren because it's Kylo Ren. So there's Ren and there's Ray. Evelina said, yep. And Kay says the universal programs will stick as temporary ones will not. I scroll down too much. Again. Portland demonstrators are getting better. Helmets, leaf blowers, shields, umbrellas, whatever works. Real grassroots. Love it. Okay, good to hear that, Steve. Michael Brooks will be missed badly. Avril says the plan is to keep us frustrated and desperate so the scared folks in the burbs accept fascism as long as protests don't spread to their privileged lifestyles. And since so many people who are living in the suburbs are benefiting from the military-industrial complex, there is a possible basis for a bloc forming there. On the other hand, people in the suburbs need child care. They also like to be very genteel and very liberal about certain things, which Trump is very illiberal about, of course. In the northern suburbs, even in the suburbs around here, people are pretty anti-racist at this point, at least conscious racism. Evelina says, for sure. And Steve says, exactly, they're shaking in their gated communities and will accept the fascism. I'm not so sure. Because that would mean, I think they'll accept inverted totalitarianism, but fascism, I'm not sure. Naked fascism of the Trump kind, okay, the Mussolini kind, I don't think so. Avril says because that would mean they'll actually have to stand for something and they don't even like to come out of their fortresses of neoliberal enslavement. That's pretty good. Pretty good, Avril. It's a pretty good characterization. Stacey says, how about non-contiguous nation state. State of Maryland wants in on that. Huh, sorry? Okay, Bonnie wants to tell me something. Huh? What? Oh, Patreon, yes. I am reminded to remind you about my Patreon account, so I will remind you for just a minute about my Patreon account. I will put up the graphic for tonight's show that has patreon.com/show_Firestone in it. And now I will stop sharing that. And not subject you to it too much longer. So Stacy says, okay, that Maryland wants in on that. Maybe Virginia would want in on it too. I don't know. Certainly D.C. would want in on it though. And how would D.C. get it? No. I suspect the United States will one way or another continue to retain control of Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. right around Washington, D.C. Unless, of course, we have a total upsetting of the whole apple cart and the East Coast down as far as North Carolina joins the West Coast. Avril said, would they still qualify for federal funding? Would who qualify for federal funding? Would the nation state on the West Coast qualify for federal funding? No, they wouldn't qualify for federal funding. But guess what? They could have their own central bank and provide their own federal funding. I mean, for a nation state of 55 million people, or some odd, yeah, and if they joined Canada, Canada already has its own federal funding. They're a monetarily sovereign nation. Steve says California is the fifth largest economy in the world. That may be dated. Surely China is larger than California. The United States is larger than California. Germany is larger than California. Okay. How about Japan? Is Japan larger than California? I mean, it's got 130 million people, and it's a very modern, prosperous country. It may be larger than California at this point. Russ says, my former wife wanted to retire in Bellingham, Washington. She's long gone, but I enjoyed the visit there. It's beautiful. It rains a lot in Bellingham, Washington, though, doesn't it? Evelina says, West Coast nation. Everyone would flood there. I don't know if everyone would flood there, but I think it would attract a lot of people from the United States. I don't know if there's so much room to grow in California, though, anymore. Stacey says, yes, federal funding from a different central bank because it is a wholly different sovereign. Evelina says, autonomous. I think this would qualify for federal aid. It doesn't need federal aid. It doesn't need federal funding. It would have its own federal funding. Albert says, like he caved to the COVID masks, but many died due to his denial. Yes, he did cave to the COVID mask because he was losing too much support, even from his own people. Maryland and Virginia have lots and lots of guns. They do. They have lots and lots of guns. Steve says, sending in federal troops only pisses people off and the protests get bigger. He says, exactly, Dr. Joe. Evelina says, yep. Kay says, universal programs will stick as temporary ones do not. Stacy says, Ray is her name. Yes, I think it's spelled R-A-E though, isn't it? Not R-A-Y, right? And Avril says, I did see one of the movies that she was in. Avril says, one of the newest sinister DT campaign ads shows a cop getting beat up by protesters. Turns out it was a scenario from the Ukraine. Steve says, Han Solo knocked up Princess Leia. Okay, I think they were married at the time. Avril says, getting beat up. Correction. Evelina says, figures. Stacy says, yep, sexy times for the smuggler and the princess. Avril says, I never watched one Star Wars movie just because everyone else does. Always been rebellious. Steve says, I thought she was with the Skywalker kid. He was a dork anyway. She couldn't be with the Skywalker kid because the Skywalker kid turned out to be her brother. Her fraternal twin brother. And they were fraternal twins. Two little babies born of Natalie Portman. Stacey says, I saw the first one on the first day it came out at the Uptown Theater on Connecticut Avenue. Oh, cool. Very cool. Where'd you go for dinner afterwards? Steve says, I watched the first one. Kay says, I took my kids to see the first one, but I was over it then. Laugh out loud. Talking about the first one in 1979, Kay? Kay says, we're now going into the Mad Max phase in this country. Avril says, have you read about the drop in births? The forecasters find this very troubling for some reason. Rob says, hey, Yoda. Hey, Rob. Rob says, how you doing? I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Or actually, I'm alternately doing fine and getting very, very angry at the various politicians and their total effing up, of the country. Steve says, AOC could play Furiosa. I am sorry. I think that AOC is a very, very sweet person who cares about people. I'll bet she's much nicer than Ted Yoho's wife. Any day. Evelina says, yeah, I read about the drop in the European nations. Dr. Joe, autonomous regions in Spain get federal funding. That's Spain. Spain is not a monetary sovereign, and they still give them federal funding. Avril says, speaking of Germany, they're groveling to Trump to please keep the military there. I hated reading that. Yeah, because the Germans don't want to build up their own military again. Because they're afraid everybody there will go Trumpist. Avril says, from who? The U.S.? Steve says, I saw a study that in 50 years the world's population could be only half of today's. Perhaps our problems will solve themselves, or perhaps the world will solve us for it. because we appear to be the world's problem. Evelina says no from their central government. Evelina says laugh out loud. Carmen Stacia says, I was 19. What? I was 19. I probably hit the buoy mongers. Buoy mongers. I don't even know where that is. Kay says, Steve, if I were young in this mess, I sure wouldn't bring a child into it. Evelina says, AOC is La Pasionaria. Stacy says, actually, it was 77 and I was 17. I think the first Star Wars appeared in 1979, if I am not completely mistaken. And Steve Wolfbrand says, but Yo-Ho is a dick. No, Yo-Ho is a bottle of rum. As in Yo-Ho-Ho and a bottle of rum. Sorry. Couldn't resist it.
No, that was terrible.
That was terrible, Bonnie says. It was terrible, all right. Okay.
Good night.
On that note, I think we're done for tonight. Avril says, I love how AOC straightened out the religious nut jobs about their hypocrisy last week. She exposed them good. Yeah, she did. Of course, it's very easy to expose them, but it's been a long time since people were so impolite as to tell them the truth. AOC only told them the truth. Evelina says, you were 19, Stace. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming. And share this, share this, share this. Oh, by the way, there was a... Stacy says, Star Wars was released on May 25th, 1977, and first subtitled Episode 4, A New Hope, in the 1979 book, The Art of Star Wars. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, was released on May 21st, 1980, also achieving wide financial and critical success. Yes. The final film in the trilogy, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, was released on May 25th, 1983. The story of the original trilogy focuses on Luke Skywalker's quest to become a Jedi, his struggle with the evil Imperial agent Darth Vader, and the struggle of the... It was a good show again. So you were 17. You were 17. Thank you, Stacy. You really were 17. And thank you for correcting me and recalling for me that it was 1977 when Star Wars appeared. My son was only 8 and my daughter was only 5. Did we take the whole family, including Devora, to see Star Wars?
Probably.
You think so?
We didn't hold back anything.
We didn't hold back anything. Good night.